Good morning. So it's a pleasure to be here, Tarek. Great thank you. It's an honor to be here to speak to this great auditorium about something which is really dear to my heart. It's data. I'm in the pharma industry for more than 25 years in the meantime, so it's quite a while. I was always dealing with data. And in preparation of this particular presentation, I was wondering what could be a topic which might be of interest. And there were two inspirations for this specific topic. One was a quite lively, heated discussion with my son about his future. I might come back to that in a second, but the other inspiration is a bit older. One of my former employers offered the employees the opportunity to speak with patients. That company I worked with was developing drugs for epilepsy patients. And I had the great honor and opportunity to meet a patient. He was a professor for epilepsy who unfortunately suffered from epilepsy when he became older. And I had a discussion with him. I said, you know, what do you think about our company? I said, yeah, so far so good. I said, you know, what about our drugs? Do they help you? I said, yeah, the drugs are quite good. So I said, then you should be happy. I said, yeah, to be honest, no, I'm not happy. It's a matter of fact that your drugs help me. I have almost no seizure anymore. So I, as the employee of that company, felt quite good. I said, you know, that is not my problem. My problem is that I do not know when a seizure attack arises. Guys, don't you see indications in your data to help me and other epilepsy patients to recognize when we will experience a seizure? And the other thing what he said was, you know, haven't you found in your data that most of the patients who suffer from epilepsy also suffer from depression? Look into your data, you will see it. Why have you not thought about treating patients in that space as well? Because patients potentially would like to get rid of seizures, but as long as this cannot be guaranteed 100%, there are other things which bother the patients. And so, long story short, he gave me the inspiration to look into data more than you usually would do, because a company developing a drug is focusing primarily on an endpoint, and our endpoint was reduction of seizure. But there's more you can find in your data you collect. And that was one of the inspirations for this talk here. So I would like to talk about the importance of data. And I guess I've already illustrated that there is importance in data. But you see inside of the brackets, new importance of data. And I will talk about that in a second. I would like to guide you through a couple of aspects here. On one hand side, I will come to this heated discussion with my son in a second. Then I would like to show you how we are dealing with data today. And I also would like to show you, and this will be my main focus today, I would like to show you what I see arising in our space, which is meaningful and which potentially will give us big benefits in terms of data utilization and data insight generation. So let me get back to this discussion with my son. We discussed what he should do. He is 16 years old. He was not that old at that point in time. He was wondering, what shall I study? What shall I do? And I said, you know, why don't you look into the area of data sciences? I personally, I'm the head of data sciences and analytics, so he said, oh, Dad, you know, great, that's what you are doing, so I don't want to do what you are doing. But I tried to illustrate in a discussion with him what it really means to be in that particular space, whether it is in pharma or in other industries. And I shared with him something which was probably not very useful in that discussion. I said, a couple of years ago, probably more than 10 years ago, when I was significantly younger, I was offered by one of my employers to think together with others about the future. What should a pharma company be in the future? And at that point in time, I made a very provocative statement. I even presented it to the board of that company, and probably they were a bit shocked about that. I said, you know, the most important asset of a pharma company is not the drug anymore, or will not be the drug anymore. From my perspective, from my personal perspective, it will be the data. So not a lot of stuff happened at that point in time, but I can see that something of that nature is arising all over the place. And that led me, sorry for the wrong direction, and that led me to this slide here, where I said data is at least an important asset. You can see here that some companies still believe that their product and the service they offer is more important than the data. But I personally believe that we can see more and more companies who realize that the service and the product they bring to the table is something which will change over time. The data they are dealing with will stay and will give them background information for future developments. So that led to this specific slide. And in the discussion with my son, we looked into a couple of case studies, I would call them. So let me go into one of those, and this is a very common example. You might know it is Google. I asked him, what is the business model of Google? They offer, of course, information to their customers, us, but is that the purpose of this company? Most likely not. They would like to get data. They would like to get information from us in order to do data analytics, in order to generate data insights, and to build something on whatever they can learn in that specific space. So this is a very common example, and he was not very much impressed about that. I came up with a second one. The second is Amazon. And I said, we are all buying stuff from Amazon. We get the packages, great. Is it the business purpose of Amazon to send packages around the world, or to help sending packages around the world? Probably not. The business objective of this company, as many others, is to collect information, because they collect information from a lot of customers who order, and they can see things in their data you would not imagine. For example, you can see that particular things, such as drugs, are ordered in a particular place on Earth, and ask yourself why. There might be a reason, and there is already an indicator in the data for further analysis, and potentially you can generate good insights by doing that. But I found another example which impressed me. A couple of years ago, not that long ago, I guess it was in 2016, I was asked by my company to travel to India. I arrived early in the morning, quite tired. I was quite tired. Went to my hotel. It was a Marriott hotel. And the television was on, and there was an advertisement from that company. Some senior executives were talking about their company. At that point in time, they merged with Starwood. And guess what one of the key executives said? She did not say, we are the biggest hotel company on Earth. She said, we are the biggest data company on Earth, potentially in that specific space, but it was amazing that she was not talking about a hotel chain anymore, not an entertainment business. She was talking about a data business. This really was quite remarkable to me. And I would like to come up with a fourth example, and that's Medidata. When I became aware of Medidata years ago, I was not that inspired, I have to be honest. Because what bothered me at that point in time was, and I consider it to be a great opportunity today, what bothered me at that point in time was you could not install the software on your computers. It was in the cloud. At that point in time, I thought this is a disadvantage. Today, I consider it to be a great advantage, because to have all the data at one place, and not only your own data, but other data, this is a great, great benefit, because you have pooled information which allows you to do something which was mentioned before. You can do pattern analysis beyond your own data. You can identify fraud, you can identify anomalies in your data, things you would not be able to do if you would store your data just on your computers, if you would have only your data. And I will come back to that example in a couple of minutes again. This offers something which, from my point of view, is extremely meaningful. We were talking about the fabricated or synthetic placebo arms. Imagine a patient. Imagine you are a patient. You're suffering from a disease, and it cannot be easily treated. You have to be included in a clinical study where a company promises a better treatment than what is on the market already. When you enter such a study, you're not guaranteed that you will get the drug. Imagine this feeling. You are suffering from something which might be life-threatening. Your hope is to get a treatment. Your hope is to enter such a study, but you know there is a risk that I might get placebo, a sugar pill. That's not a good perspective from my point of view. And what we can potentially do very soon, and I've seen good examples already, and Medidata was mentioning this as well. I can see that we can find or can generate placebo arms, virtual or synthetic placebo arms, by looking into the huge amount of data. And I'm coming back to this example, Medidata, where data are stored in a cloud. There are other places where you can find information. That's, from my point of view, extremely meaningful. So let me come to this slide here, which explains more or less why we are collecting data, why we should collect data, and why data is so important. Eventually the most important asset companies, even pharma companies, have. It is the opportunity to do data analytics, to generate new data insights, to generate things you would not see if you would use the data only for the purpose they were collected originally. I'm coming back to this example with this epilepsy patient. My former company was looking for an endpoint, reduction in seizure rate, extremely successful, worked. The patient said it works. But we did not look into the data beyond, and that is an opportunity we have, and that is what you can do with analytics. But it requires that you have good data, that you have enough data, that you can apply technologies which usually are called artificial intelligence and all those kind of buzzwords you might hear. But you know, all that stuff is not that new. It did exist already 20 years ago. We couldn't apply it because we did not have enough data to do it. Today, we have an opportunity to deal with more data, better data. But now let me look into the here and now in the pharma industry. When you look into the way how data are dealt with in the pharma industry today, you will see a couple of things. And you see on the right-hand side 3 buckets. It's data acquisition, it is data processing, and data access and data provision. In all the 3 areas, I think we are dealing with huge problems today. In the data acquisition space, you see there is EDC and ECOA mentioned. You know, EDC was considered to be an innovation. For me, it was not an innovation. It's just the old way how we did collect data 20, 30 years ago, just with an electronic piece of electronic tool. The problem of this data collection is that we are not getting the data from the source. We are transcribing information, and transcription of data is time-consuming, resource-intensive. You are dealing with a lot of errors, manual transcription errors and related things. So that is not good, and definitely something what we have to look into. This is, as I mentioned, slow, and it takes quite a while in order to get the data into the databases. And there is a lack of standardization. It was mentioned this morning in one of the speeches. I guess Tarek mentioned this. The importance of standardization is definitely something which is undervalued from my point of view. If you compare the pharma industry with car production has managed to produce cars in a way which is based on standards, which allowed them to industrialize their production. I would say the conduct of studies is by far not in the area of being industrialized. Each study is an individual piece. Each study is an individual car which was built by an architect who owns this car, and the architect knows this car very well. This is, from my point of view, a disadvantage, and through the standardization in that space, a lot of things can be improved. In the data processing space, we see, from my point of view, many data transformations. Unfortunately, most of the data transformations are manual in nature. And this needs to be avoided. I was working for numerous companies, especially while I was employed by Par Excel. I could see quite a lot of clients at that point in time. And even my company I'm working with right now, we all suffer from the problem that we have to transcribe data from one data model into another data model, into a third data model for different purposes. Whenever we do this, we usually don't use machines who are able to do this in an automated manner. Very often we have our hands in this. And this very often leads to transcription errors, which can be quite costly. It happened in my life that it was recognized after an approval of a drug that there was an important data error in the data, which unfortunately was triggered by just a transcription error. And this had caused, of course, a lot of problems, and this is something what we have to avoid. Ultimately, I would like to go to the green bar here. It is the data access and data provision bar. From my point of view, this is the biggest challenge we are dealing with today, because today data are stored in silos. We have SAS data sets, we have relational databases, all those kind of things are good places for data, but they don't bring the data together. If we would like to do analytics, we have to bring the different data sources together. And this is very, very time consuming. Very often we talk about curated data, data curation, which means at the end of the day, we have to bring order into the mess, into the data mess. And that is something which is quite costly again and prevents especially pharma to apply data analytics at a broader scale. So let me move on and let me go into the future a little bit, or in the here and now, because I can see a lot of things which I will show you in a second today already, even though it is not applied across the board. You see the same picture here again. So the desire in the pharma industry, from my point of view, is to do analytics. That is what we want to do. The key objectives are to get more data. It is to get new data. It is to get better data accessibility, to take them out of the silos. The data quality is still an issue and needs to be addressed somehow. We have a huge complexity in the pharma industry when it comes to data, and that is also something what prevents us from doing analytics. And ultimately, we would like to apply analytics. This is, by the way, one of the bigger challenges I see, because we see in the industry, Google, Amazon, and all those guys, they can apply analytics. When I look into my own department, when I check, guys, where do we use machine learning today? Where do we use NLP and other stuff? There is very often quite a lot of silence. Not complete silence. There is already something, and I will talk about that in a second. But in general, there are not a lot of use cases right now. And I would say one of the reasons, or many of the reasons why we don't do this, is very much related to the fact that we don't have enough data right now, that we do not have good data quality, that the data is in different data silos and cannot be unleashed. Those kind of things prevent us from doing data analytics. So let's look into a couple of things which, from my point of view, are quite meaningful and will influence our business quite significantly. Partially, and to a great extent, I would say, we have heard about those things, so I amplify more or less what you have heard this morning already. So let me start with the data collection pillar here again. You see, first of all, there is devices. From my point of view, this is the future, because it allows us to avoid data transcription on a piece of paper or an ECRF page or an eCOA system. If we can get the data right from the patient, then we are in the right place, because then we have the truth, and that is something which is important. Devices also offer us not to get only data points. They offer us something which is a challenge, but also an opportunity. They offer us longitudinal data. So that means we don't get just blood pressure at one particular point in time. We get blood pressure over time. We get pulse over time. We get all those kind of things over time. And it's quite interesting what you can learn from longitudinal data. If you really look into this, you can see patterns. You can recognize things you cannot see if you just collect individual data points. A quite exciting space. In the device space, I would like to share with you also one example which popped up last week on my desk. Very often when we conduct studies, we suffer from the fact that patients don't adhere to the treatment regimen. They don't take the pills exactly when they should take the pills. Sometimes an hour later, sometimes not at all. All those kind of things happen. And very often it's difficult to figure out what really happened with the pill that the patient was expected to swallow. In one of our studies, we plan to utilize, or at least it was proposed, we plan to utilize a pill which dissolves in your stomach and generates a signal when it's dissolved. That means you can recognize by the second when the treatment reaches the body. So this is something which, from my point of view, is quite meaningful, because it allows us better to understand what is the real treatment effect, because we know exactly when the drug was taken and when it reached the stomach. Very, very interesting piece of technology. I saw the pill recently. It's quite amazing piece, and there are so many other devices. You can't believe what is, or I could not believe, and I cannot believe what's already on the market and what might come on the market. The other thing is EHR. EHR stands for Electronic Health Record Systems. So doctors document a lot of information in their computers. They are using nowadays EHR systems, electronic health record systems. And why not to use this information in clinical studies? Why do we ask a doctor or their supporters in a study to transcribe information they have already in their systems so that it ultimately pops up in our EDC systems? It's a waste of their time. There are transcription errors again, and it takes time to do it. So why not to get to the source there as well? And another thing in the data collection space is decentralized studies. We talked about it today. It's quite an amazing thing from my point of view. I was involved in numerous studies in my, not as a patient, but as a supporter. And very often we had to deal with elderly patients, Parkinson patients and others, who barely can go to a doctor. Neither to a specific site. And from my point of view, the pharma industry has to think about better ways to get to the patients. Why to ask elderly patients to travel hundreds of miles to a place where they do not feel comfortable, and where they have to suffer from their disease eventually even more than in their home? That is definitely something which needs to be looked into, and there are multiple reasons why this should be done, not only for the patient, but also for the pharma companies. Because if you have motivated patients, if you have patients who really feel comfortable in their environment as far as they can, then the likelihood to get reliable data, better data, more data is quite high. So from that point of view, in the data collection space, I see a lot of opportunities as mentioned here. In the data processing space, there are also a couple of things which I consider to be quite meaningful, and I do not want to become too technical here, but at least in my area of responsibility, I've seen over the last 25 years that on one hand side, there was the desire to introduce standards, and it was not always introduced in a very successful manner, especially when standards were introduced in a siloed way. Some were looking just on data collection standards. They didn't take care of data standards which were used downstream, such as STM and ADAM and those kind of things. And what I'm looking into for quite a while now, and even with my current company, is the utilization of so-called metadata repositories. These are databases which allow you to store standards in a machine-readable manner, which is very important. Very often standards are in Excel spreadsheets and those kind of things, which is not is not the right way to store this information, because it's not machine-readable in the way it should be and could be. But the other aspect is, in a metadata repository, you can combine all the standards which are related to your data points. You can store for data points such as age, the code list, which is assigned to that data point. You can store the edit checks you want to apply. You can store the conventions you would like to collect this information in your EDC system of choice. You can store SCTM data transformation rules about that, and so on and so forth. You bring all the meta information about a data point in such a repository, machine readable, and if you have this and if you maintain this well, then you can use it in order to automate data transformation and data collection processes downstream. It's definitely a very powerful idea. There is a couple of technologies on the market right now which support this. It doesn't matter which technology you use. It's more a mindset in an organization to bring all the standards together, make them machine readable, and utilize them in your data processes. There are a couple of other things which, from my point of view, are important. I skipped the event-driven process architecture for a while, but I would like to spend a couple of minutes on the machine learning, artificial intelligence, natural language processing aspect. This is definitely something which is a buzzword at this point in time. I would say it is not utilized to the extent it could be done. It could be utilized in the pharma industry, but I'm always happy when I can find an example, a case study where it's applied. And I'm extremely proud that the company I work for right now has applied this very successfully, for example, in the medical coding space. You know, medical coding means you have to have medically trained people, ideally medical doctors, to read endless lists of verbatims and to code those verbatims in Medra or other dictionaries. This is a task which is labor intensive, it's expensive, and it's boring, I would say. You cannot find a lot of medical doctors who went to school who want to look into endless lists of verbatims. This is, some like it, but the majority of the medical doctors who went to school don't like it. And we have identified a way to replace at least one level of coders, the first tier of the coder process. We still have a human being checking what a computer is doing. We are using IBM Watson for that. And we have managed to reach a precision rate which is at the human precision rate at this point in time. And these things are learning. You know, they are becoming better over time. And I'm pretty certain very soon we will see a better precision in terms of coding produced by a computer than by a human being. And that will be the point in time where we can say, can we redeploy the brains of the medical doctors to generate new insights based on the data which are coded, instead of wasting their energy and their brains to do a very difficult but how shall I call it? A very difficult but boring coding job. Good. Let me go quickly to the right column, which I don't want to go into from a technical perspective. I just want to throw out a couple of thoughts. And I would like to encourage you to think about it, because from my point of view, this is at the end of the day the key. If we collect more data, if we process data more effectively, as shown in the blue and the red column, we have to figure out where to store the data. And we may not make the mistake we are doing today. Store information in SAS data sets means it's a silo. You cannot access the data across the board. It's very difficult to get to look into this. So from that point of view, utilize other methodologies. Even relational databases are, from my point of view, silos. They are not connected. So what my company is looking into is what called linked data, semantic web technology, stuff like that, which allows to bring different data sources together in order to make them available for data analytics. So let me come to the end. And this slide, from my point of view, illustrates what we can achieve if we do it right. In the data collection space, if we apply those things I've shown you, I think we should get more and better data as number one. In the data processing space, if you apply those things, and there are many more than I've showed you, we should be able to get faster and more reliable information. But the most important piece here is on the right-hand side, data provision. We have to make sure that the data are accessible for data analytics, that they can be utilized for what is in the industry as a buzzword, that we can do analytics, data insight generation, and all those kind of things with the modern technologies. So that comes to my conclusion. I think there is an opportunity to unleash the power of our data, but we have to operate differently in comparison to what we have done over the last 20, 30 years. And you see in the fine print underneath a very provocative statement I shared with colleagues in my organization. I think we should start to act like a data company. We do not have to become a data company. A lot of people still believe our drugs we develop are the key asset. But in order to do this more effectively, I think we have to operate differently with data in order to develop drugs. And the mindset of a data company probably would serve that purpose. So with that, I would like to close.